PlayStation 5 has officially been given a release date. It's holiday season next year, 2020. To guess, I would say end of November, and with the knowledge that the next Xbox is also releasing in that same time period, what does that mean for the future of Battlefield? And will there be a new Battlefield game next year? Well, this is what I wanted to discuss today. How realistic is it, and would this be a good or a bad thing? So the lid was blown off the PlayStation 5 today. We didn't get to see what it actually looked like or the controller itself, but there was a ton of new detail released. The too long didn't read is a new DualShock controller with haptic feedback. In terms of the console itself, we've got confirmed GPU hardware ray tracing, 100 gig optical discs in the player, which will also double up for 4K Blu-rays, reinforcing how good the new solid state drive is, completely new user interface, and some kind of voice assistant on the controller. So very exciting times, the PS5 and the Scarlet all sounding like proper next-gen consoles that I'm sure we'll all go out and buy, even though we can't really afford them. As for Battlefield, what are the consequences of this? Well, this is all conjecture. I have no facts or inside information about this. I'm simply basing this on my assumptions and knowledge of the gaming industry. I wanted to make this video because the fact that there are 2 new consoles coming out next year will definitely have an influence on DICE and Electronic Arts in whether they should put out a new Battlefield game next year. After all, it is their only popular shooter title and really the only true competition to Call of Duty. So in a lot of ways it would make sense to try and put a new Battlefield product on shelves when these consoles launch. How realistic is that though? Well, to answer that question, let's look at the release cadence of recent titles from DICE. And I feel like it's safe to say that we could start with Battlefield Bad Company. Perhaps that was the start of the modern gaming age. And that released in 2008 alongside Mirror's Edge. The next year, 2009, we had Battlefield Heroes and 1943. And I would say that those could be considered as smaller titles. They're not proper AAA boxed products. And then 2010, Battlefield Bad Company 2. That's a 2-year gap between true Battlefield titles, let's say, and they also worked on Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, Battlefield Online, and Medal of Honor. I believe they did the multiplayer component of that game. And then 2011, of course, we got Battlefield 3, the big dog. It felt like DICE had been working on this for a long time. I believe that most people reckon it was around 5 years to put everything in place for the new engine and the whole game. 2-year gap, nothing comes out. 2013, Battlefield 4. And as you can see here, this is really important to note. This came out on PC, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, 360 and Xbox One. 5 platforms. And if you remember, Battlefield 4 at launch was not in a good state at all, and perhaps releasing on all of these platforms put a lot of pressure on DICE, didn't give them enough time to create a proper polished product. But that's again a 2-year gap there between BF3 and BF4. In 2015, Hardline, DICE didn't take the lead on that one. That was Visceral Games, but they did do a couple of the multiplayer levels. But of course, I think they were mainly working on Star Wars Battlefront. And then 2016, the next Battlefield game releases. So that's a 3-year gap there between BF4 and BF1. And at the same time, they did Mirror's Edge Catalyst. And then 2017, Star Wars Battlefront 2 releases. And then the next Battlefield game comes out in 2018, of course, Battlefield 5. And that's coming up to nearly a year since it's been released. So typically speaking, I would say that there's a 2 to 3 year gap between mainline Battlefield titles. So perhaps you could say that's the average time it takes for a Battlefield title to be produced and then released into the wild. So come November next year, 2020, that will be 2 years after Battlefield 5 released. So you could argue that DICE would have enough time to develop a game in that time period. And we have seen some leaks and rumours about Bad Company 3 potentially being a launch title for the PlayStation 5. So what would be the positives for DICE and EA releasing a launch title on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlet? If you are a launch title, maybe you've been paid money by Microsoft or Sony, so you can make that happen. And you would assume that there won't be many titles at launch, and therefore a lot of those people picking up the console might end up buying your game. I think being a launch title for a brand new console like the PlayStation 5, that's a big thing for these studios and developers. I feel like it just puts a flag in the mud where you say, yep, our game was on there on launch, we did it. And of course, DICE would want to compete with Call of Duty because you can bet your bottom dollar that next year, whether that's Black Ops 4 or whatever Call of Duty game it is, will be releasing on the new consoles too. And would DICE not want to compete with that? Maybe they just wouldn't care. I think that they would. And EA certainly would too. So there are some positives for releasing with the new console, yes, but I also think there's a lot of negatives too. The most obvious one comes back to what we just talked about, the user base. When a new console comes out, the user base is going to be quite small, and if you've only got your game on that platform, the next Xbox and PlayStation 5 and maybe PC, then you're going to sell less copies than if it were on the massive existing platforms, which are PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So then you think, well, do we also make the game for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One too? But that comes with a few caveats, because if these consoles are as much of a big generational leap as Xbox and Sony are touting, developing a game for the older platforms as well as the newer platforms could potentially hamper it. It could hold it back in terms of its overall design and graphics and quality, and maybe the developers just wouldn't want to do that. And you'd be alienating the current majority of your player base and fans. Also, going back to Battlefield 4, like I said, that came out on 5 platforms: PC, PS3, PS4, Xbox 360 and Xbox One. And there's no doubt that that had a big effect on the overall quality of the game. And would DICE really want to go down that road again and make a game available for 5 platforms? I personally don't think they would. Yes, you would sell more, but it's a lot more pressure and stress on the developers, and you've got less time to do everything. And you assume that because of that, the overall quality would be lower down the ladder. I think we also have to take into account here what has happened with Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 5. We know that DICE had a difficult time with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 5. Both of those games didn't launch in the greatest states, but with Battlefront 2, they've turned that around. BF5 was delayed by a month, and it's been really light on content up until recently, but it does feel like with Metro and Al Sundan and the upcoming Pacific that maybe things are turning around for the game. But because of those problems, you could assume that they've had to pull developers back onto those projects instead of working on new things. And that's precious time that could be used to developing the next thing, whether that's an engine update or a brand new game entirely, even a new IP. And if they do bring out a new game next year, would they have had enough time to properly flesh things out and develop it? And would it just be a rushed product that didn't work on launch? I don't think anyone would want that situation again. And with that in mind, I do think that it's unlikely we'll see a new Battlefield game next year. But if we don't, and instead let's say a new Battlefield game releases November 2021, that would be 3 years between BF5 and the next game. So if DICE don't release a product in that time period, what are they doing? Well, you could say they're supporting the live service of Battlefield 5 more, or they're continuing to add Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. We know that we've got the Rise of Skywalker content coming up. And of course, then they could also dive into stuff like The Mandalorian, the new trilogies, even something like the Kenobi series, whatever it might be. As for continued support on BF5, well, we've got the Pacific, that's coming out this year. After that, there's still a load of World War II history that just isn't in this game. The Eastern Front with Russia, for example. Italians, you could explore the African campaigns a lot further. You could really dive into the Americans in Normandy and France and everything they did. There's so much source material there, and I think DICE could definitely flesh this out. And I've talked about this in a video before where BF5, if DICE wanted to, it could become this ultimate World War II sandbox if they choose to support it for, let's say, the next couple of years. But I think the reality is that they will not. I reckon that after the Pacific, that might be it. Why do I think that? Well, BF5, I reckon it didn't sell as well as EA and DICE wanted it to, and you can pick things like that up from the investor calls that they have every quarter. If you listen, it's obvious that they were a bit disappointed with the sales. And realistically, is adding more content to the game going to sell more copies of the game? Because ultimately that's the goal for the developers and for the publisher. If we compare option A, at DICE we've built 4 new maps that you can play on, and there's a couple of new tanks and new guns, versus option B, this is a new Battlefield game. It's in modern day. It's next gen. It's got all this cool stuff. Look how awesome it is. Which one is the most exciting proposition to A, the audience, and B, to investors? It's the second option. It's the new game. A new game will make money. Continuing the live service, unless there's a massive change in how things are done, I just don't think they're going to really sell that many more copies of Battlefield 5. So that's why I think that after the Pacific, that might be it, and we'll have to wait until the next thing. Will that next thing come in 2020 though, with the launch of the new consoles? I personally don't think it will, sadly. I don't think we'll see a new Battlefield game until October, November 2021. And as much as that hurts as a big fan of the franchise, I think deep down, really, it's a good thing because it gives DICE a chance to really recuperate and monitor the gaming industry, see how quickly and rapidly things are changing, and think about what's next for the franchise. BF5 was very divisive in its gameplay mechanics and player base. Some people love it, some people hate it. It had a bad reveal marred in controversy and comments flying left, right, and center. I think a lot of people just wanted a more up-to-date version of Battlefield 1942 with BF5, and then on the other side of the coin you've got this massive chunk of the Battlefield audience that was there for BF3 and BF4, and they want a proper Battlefield next-gen modern warfare shooter with some innovation, maybe with more players, bigger levels, whatever it might be. I don't have the answers, but whatever DICE deliver next has to be an absolute winner for Battlefield. And rushing out a game in 2 years just so they can meet the launch of the next consoles, I just don't think it's that feasible, and it's not that smart of a move right now. I kind of hope they don't do that in a way for the sake of the franchise. But who knows, I might be wrong. Maybe they've been working on whatever's next for Battlefield for like 3 years already. And if they release a Battlefield game that's full of content and polished and fun to play, hey, I'm all for it coming out next year. But I just don't want another situation like with BF4 and BF5 again, where it just feels like it was rushed to meet a quota. From an outsider's perspective, I don't think they've been working on a new Battlefield game for like the last 3 years or something, because Battlefield 5 was delayed. It was really buggy. Battlefront 2 had a load of problems. They had to develop a load of new stuff for it. Pretty much do over the entire progression system. So they've had a lot of other work to do. I suppose that's how it looks from the outside anyway. But again, this is all assumptions and conjecture, and I may be 100% wrong on all of this. So if DICE don't release a Battlefield game until 2021, are they going to release any games? Can a studio just not release games for a few years? Well, I guess, yeah, I suppose so, if they've got enough funding. But I think it's more likely DICE will come out with some kind of new IP next year that's been kind of worked on the side or something. That's my guess anyway. Maybe they're even working on a new Star Wars game. Hey, that would be cool. And with that said, that's all for today, guys. Do let me know your thoughts on all of this down in the comments below. Do you think there will be a new Battlefield game next year with the launch of PS5 and the next Xbox, or will we have to wait just a bit longer? And how would you feel about that? And that's all, guys. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.